When I walked up to my house that Sunday afternoon, I was tired but happy to finally be home. I had just finished a 3-day work trip and was looking forward to relaxing, maybe making a cup of coffee and watching a movie. But when I put my key in the door, it didn't feel right. The door was already unlocked. My heart skipped a beat. I pushed it open and froze. There were boxes everywhere. My couch was gone. My TV stand was halfway out the door. 2 men I didn't recognize were carrying my dresser outside. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I saw them, my parents, Charles and Linda, standing in the middle of my living room like it was theirs. Mom? Dad? What the hell is going on? I asked, my voice cracking from shock. My mom turned around, smiling like nothing was wrong. Oh, Ben, you're back early. We thought we'd help you move some of your things. You've been so busy, sweetheart. Move my things, I repeated, stepping inside. Move them where? To our place, my dad said calmly, as if it made perfect sense. He had his hands on his hips, looking around like he was inspecting the place. You've been struggling, son. We decided it's time you came home. We're saving you from wasting money on this place. It took a second for his words to sink in. You broke into my house, and you're taking my stuff? My dad shrugged. Don't make it sound so dramatic. We helped you buy this house. It's as much ours as yours. The movers looked nervous, pausing mid-step with one of my boxes. I turned toward them. Put that down. Now. My mom sighed, like she was the one being inconvenienced. Ben, stop making a scene. We're doing what's best for you. You'll thank us later. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Every part of me wanted to believe this was some kind of joke, that they'd laugh and say they were just helping organize things. But there was no humor in their faces. They really thought they had the right to take over my life again. I looked around the room, at my half-empty shelves, at the space where my wife's piano used to sit. That's when I saw one of the movers lift the small wooden box from the coffee table. My stomach dropped. That was Sophie's memory box, the last thing I had of her. Put that down right now, I said sharply. My dad started to speak, but I cut him off. You don't get to touch that. You don't get to touch anything. The movers exchanged glances and quietly set the box down. My mom frowned, shaking her head. You've really changed, Ben. You used to listen. I looked at her and said quietly, yeah, I did. And that's exactly why you thought you could do this. For the first time, my mom looked unsure. My dad crossed his arms, but didn't say another word. I stood there, surrounded by half-packed boxes in silence, realizing that the people who raised me didn't see me as an adult, or even as their son. They saw me as something they could control. And I knew right then that was about to end. I stood there in complete shock, trying to understand what was happening. My mom's calm smile made it worse. She looked at me like nothing strange was going on, like it was normal to break into someone's home and move their things out. We thought we'd help you move your stuff back home, she said, her voice soft but firm. You clearly can't manage on your own. Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. For a moment, I couldn't even respond. I just stared at her, then at the movers who were now wrapping my grandmother's piano in a blanket. That piano had been in our family for generations, and I'd spent weeks restoring it after my grandmother passed. It wasn't just furniture. It was a part of her, a memory I kept alive. And now it was being wheeled out like it meant nothing. I walked up to my mom, my voice trembling. This isn't helping, Mom. You're taking everything I own. My things. My memories. Before she could answer, my dad cut in sharply. Don't talk to your mother like that. You wouldn't even have this place if we hadn't helped you. We paid your first rent. We co-signed your loan. And now you're acting like this house is all yours? It's ours too. I turned to him, trying to keep my anger from boiling over. You did help me, I said quietly, but that doesn't give you the right to walk in here and take over my life. This house is in my name. You can't just claim it. He scoffed, his face hard. You wouldn't even be here without us. You should be grateful instead of ungrateful. That word, grateful, made something inside me snap. Grateful for what? For losing my privacy? For being treated like a child who couldn't handle life? I'd worked for everything I had after Sophie died. I'd put myself back together piece by piece, and this house was the proof of that. It was my space, my peace. But as I looked at them, I realized they didn't see that. They didn't see my effort or my healing. They saw me as something they built, something they still owned. They believed that because they once helped me, I owed them my freedom. My mom crossed her arms, as if she was the one being wronged. We're just doing what's best for you, Ben. You've been alone too long. You need family around. I shook my head slowly. No, what I need is for you to leave my things alone and respect my life. She looked away, pretending not to hear me. My dad muttered something under his breath about me being ungrateful again. The movers, clearly uncomfortable, started slowing down, unsure if they should keep packing. I could feel a mix of anger and sadness building up inside me. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to lose control. But it was becoming clear. This wasn't about helping me. It wasn't about love. It was about power. For them, this wasn't my home. It was just another place they thought they could rule over. And in that moment, standing among half-packed boxes and my mother's cold smile, I knew something deep had changed between us. Whatever trust or warmth was left in our relationship was gone. 2 years before all this, my life had completely fallen apart. My wife, Sophie, was killed in a car accident on a rainy night. One phone call had changed everything. I went from being a husband with plans and dreams to a man who couldn't even get out of bed some mornings. The silence in our apartment was unbearable. Every corner reminded me of her coffee mug on the counter, her favorite blanket on the couch. I couldn't stay there anymore. My parents were there during those first weeks. They cooked, cleaned, and made sure I wasn't alone. I was grateful at first. I thought they were helping me through the worst time of my life. When they said, "You should move closer to us so we can keep an eye on you," it sounded like care. I didn't see the warning signs then. I thought they just wanted to make sure I was okay. So I did it. I moved closer. I rented a small place near their home, trying to rebuild myself little by little. But things changed quickly. My mom started showing up unannounced with groceries, rearranging my kitchen, saying things like, "You're not eating right. You need proper food." My dad began giving me advice about work, pushing me to take jobs I didn't want. When I told them I wanted to start fresh in a new field, my dad laughed and said, "You're too unstable right now to make big decisions." At first, I let them. I was too tired to argue. I told myself they meant well. But as time went on, I realized they weren't helping. They were controlling. They started choosing furniture for my apartment, even insisting on paying for it so they could say, "We helped set you up." Every time I made a choice on my own, it turned into a fight. If I didn't answer a call, my mom would show up at my door, saying she was worried. The more I tried to stand on my own, the tighter they tried to hold on. I began to feel trapped. Grieving Sophie was already hard, but now I was fighting to breathe in my own life. The final straw came a year later when I told them I was moving out of state for a new job and buying a house. I thought they'd be proud, that they'd see I was healing and moving forward. But instead, my mom burst into tears, saying, "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us?" My dad called it betrayal. They made me feel guilty for trying to live again. For months, we barely spoke. When I finally closed on the house, I felt free for the first time since losing Sophie. I had a place that was mine, where no one could tell me what to do, what to eat, or how to grieve. Now, standing in that same living room, watching movers touch my things while my parents gave orders, I saw it clearly. They hadn't helped me because they cared about my recovery. They helped me because they wanted to keep me dependent. They never wanted me to have a life that didn't include them in control. That day, all their love made sense. It had always come with strings attached. I tried to stay calm, even though my chest felt tight and my head was spinning. I took a deep breath and said as clearly as I could, "You can't just take my things. This is illegal." My mom looked up from a box she was taping and rolled her eyes like I was being childish. "Oh, Ben, stop being dramatic," she said, waving her hand as if my words meant nothing. "We're family. Everything you have, we helped you get. We're just taking what's partly ours." Her voice was calm, almost sweet, but her words made my stomach twist. I couldn't believe she was saying that. Family or not, this was theft. They had broken into my house, brought strangers in, and were packing up my life like it belonged to them. My dad stood by the doorway, watching everything with his arms crossed. He looked proud of what they were doing. Every time I raised my voice, he gave me that warning look, the same one he used when I was a kid and dared to talk back. I turned toward the movers, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stop. All of you. Put the boxes down." The men froze for a moment, looking uncertain. One of them said quietly, "Sir, your parents told us this was their property." "It's not," I said sharply. "This house and everything in it belong to me. You're not moving another thing." Then I saw it. The label on one of the boxes made my heart drop. Sophie's memory box. It was written in my mother's handwriting. The movers were carrying it toward the door, one on each side, like it was just another piece of cargo. My throat tightened, and I felt something snap inside me. "Put that down right now," I shouted, stepping in front of them. They stopped immediately. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. "That box stays here," I said. "If anyone touches it again, there's going to be a real problem." My dad gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "Come on, Ben. Don't make a scene. You wouldn't dare call the cops on your own parents." He said it like he was sure I wouldn't, like he still believed I was that scared little kid who'd do whatever they said just to keep the peace. I looked at him, really looked, and realized that was exactly what they were counting on. My fear, my guilt, my need to please them. But this time, something was different. I wasn't that kid anymore. I'd already lost the person I loved most in the world. There was nothing left they could take from me that would hurt more than that. And maybe that's why, at that moment, I felt calm. I didn't yell or argue. I just said quietly, You shouldn't have done this. My mom frowned, confused by my tone. My dad smirked, thinking he'd won. But deep down, I already knew what I was going to do next. They thought I wouldn't stand up to them, that I'd let it slide because they were my parents. They were wrong. I walked outside, my hands still shaking, but my mind was clear. I pulled out my phone and took a deep breath before dialing 911. My voice was steady when I spoke to the dispatcher. My parents broke into my home and are stealing my property, I said. It felt strange to say those words out loud, but they were true. The dispatcher asked for my address and told me officers were. I stood on the porch, trying to calm down, listening to the faint sound of boxes being moved inside. Every noise made me angrier. I didn't want to do this, but they had crossed a line I couldn't ignore anymore. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house, lights flashing. The movers immediately stopped what they were doing and stepped back. My parents came to the door, both looking startled. My mom's face went pale when she saw the officers. "Ben," she said softly, "what did you do?" I met her eyes and said, "I called the police. You broke into my home. You left me no choice." My dad frowned, trying to stay calm. "This is ridiculous. You're not seriously going to have your own parents arrested." One of the officers approached me. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" "Yes," I said, handing him my ID and the deed papers I kept in a folder. I'd grabbed them from my office before stepping outside. They came in without my permission and started taking my belongings. The officer nodded, then turned to my parents. "Can you explain what you're doing here?" My mom tried to smile politely. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. This is our son. We were just helping him move." The second officer looked around at the moving truck, then back at my dad. "Sir, do you have any proof that this property belongs to you?" My dad's expression hardened. "We helped him pay for it. It's family property." The officer glanced at the documents in his hand, then looked directly at me. "These papers say it's in your name only. Is that correct?" I nodded. "That's correct." The officer sighed and looked at my parents. "Then I'm afraid you can't remove anything from this home. If you've already taken property, it needs to be returned immediately." My mom turned to me, whispering like she couldn't believe what was happening. "You really called them?" "Yes," I said quietly, "because this is my home, not yours." The movers quickly started unloading the few boxes they'd taken to the truck, setting them back inside. My parents stood frozen, their faces a mix of anger and humiliation. The officers made it clear they needed to leave the property right away. As they walked down the driveway, my dad stopped and turned to me. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and cold. I didn't answer. I just stood there, watching as they got into their car and drove away. The flashing lights faded, and silence filled the street again. When the officers finally left, I closed my door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The house was a mess, half-packed boxes, things out of place. But for the first time in years, it felt like mine again. I locked the door and told myself I'd never let them cross that line again. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, texts, voicemails, all from family. At first, I thought maybe my parents had told everyone something had happened to them. But when I finally picked up a call from my cousin, I realized what was really going on. "Ben," he said, his voice sharp, "what did you do?" "Everyone's talking about it. You called the cops on your own parents." I closed my eyes, already feeling the headache start. "They broke into my house," I said quietly. "They were taking my things. What was I supposed to do?" He didn't answer right away, then muttered, "You still shouldn't have done that. Family doesn't do that." That same line came up again and again throughout the day. My uncles called, telling me I embarrassed my parents in front of the neighborhood. My aunt said my mom hadn't stopped crying. Even my sister, Rachel, who hadn't spoken to me much in years, called just to tell me I had gone too far. I listened to her speak, her tone full of disappointment. "You know how sensitive Mom is," she said. "You could have handled it differently. You didn't have to involve the police." I stared out the window, feeling anger and exhaustion mix inside me. "Rachel, they broke into my home," I said. "They packed up Sophie's thing. They were stealing everything. You call that okay?" She went quiet for a few seconds, then said softly, "They didn't mean harm. They just worry about you." I almost laughed. Worry? That wasn't worry, that was control. I'd tried to explain that before, but no one in my family ever understood. To them, my parents were just loving and protective. But love doesn't cross boundaries like that. Love doesn't break into your home or take away your memories because it thinks it knows better. By the afternoon, the messages had turned from concern to guilt. "Your parents did everything for you. You made them look like criminals. Blood is blood, Ben. Don't forget that." Every word made me feel smaller, like I was the one in the wrong. For most of my life, guilt had been the chain that kept me tied to them, always apologizing, always trying to fix things I didn't break. But not this time. I sat on my couch, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. My phone kept lighting up, but I didn't reach for it. I scrolled through the missed calls, one after another, and then pressed block on each number. One by one, the noise stopped. The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It felt peaceful, heavy, but freeing. For the first time, I wasn't trying to explain myself. I wasn't trying to make anyone understand why I did what I did. I knew why. They hadn't just taken boxes and furniture. They'd tried to take away the last place where I still felt Sophie's presence. The only space where I felt safe, where I could breathe. No one could see that but me. So I chose silence. No more defending myself, no more guilt. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, control over my own life. The weeks that followed were quiet but heavy. I didn't hear from anyone for a while, and part of me hoped that maybe my parents had finally decided to leave me alone. But one morning, a white envelope showed up in my mailbox. The handwriting on it was my mother's. I sat at the kitchen table staring at it for a long time before opening. Inside was a 2-page letter written in her usual neat cursive. It started with, "We were just trying to help you reset your life." She wrote about how they never meant to hurt me, how everything they did was out of love. She said they only wanted me to come back to the family and stop isolating myself. Toward the end, she added, "You've changed since Sophie passed. You're not the same son we raised." I read that line over and over. It stung more than anything else. Of course, I had changed. How could I not? Losing Sophie had broken something inside me, but I had slowly rebuilt myself. Not the same, but stronger. My parents didn't see that. To them, my healing looked like rebellion. 2 days later, I got another letter, this time from my dad. His tone was colder. He said he forgave me for overreacting and hoped I would eventually apologize for calling the police. He ended with, "We'll always be your parents, whether you like it or not." That was the moment I realized the apologies weren't real. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. I started taking precautions. I changed all the locks on my doors and added cameras around the house. I even installed motion lights by the driveway. It felt strange, like turning my home into a fortress, but I couldn't risk going through that again. A few weeks later, my dad showed up at my doorstep unannounced. He didn't ring the bell. The cameras caught him trying to open the back gate. When I saw the footage, my stomach twisted. I called the police and filed for a restraining order that same day. It wasn't easy, and I hated that it had come to that, but I needed peace. After that, I decided to start therapy. At first, I thought it would help me deal with Sophie's loss again, but it turned into something else. I found myself talking more about my parents than about her. The therapist listened quietly, then said something that stuck with me. Grief doesn't only come from death. It also comes from betrayal. She was right. Losing Sophie had hurt in one way, a deep, aching sadness. But losing my parents' trust, realizing that their love had conditions, hurt in a completely different way. It was sharp and confusing, like mourning people who were still alive. Some nights, I'd sit by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, and think about how much had changed. I didn't feel angry anymore, just tired. I had spent years trying to please them, trying to be the version of me they wanted. But now, I finally understood that I didn't owe them my peace just because they were my parents. I couldn't fix what they'd broken. I could only protect what was left of me. Several months passed before I heard from my parents again. Life had started to feel calmer. I was still going to therapy, working regularly, and slowly learning to breathe without feeling the weight of the past pressing on my chest. Then, one evening, I got an email from my mother. The subject line said, "Let's talk." She wrote that they wanted to meet and clear the air. She said they missed me, that they wanted to rebuild the family and start over. I hesitated for days before replying. Something in me knew better, but another part, the part that still hoped for peace. I suggested we meet at a diner near the highway, a public place where things couldn't get out of control. When I walked in, they were already there. My mother waved like nothing had ever happened, while my father gave me that same stiff nod he always used when he wanted to seem in charge. I sat down, ordered coffee, and waited. For a while, no one spoke. Then my mother smiled politely and said, "We've been thinking about how to make things right." Before I could respond, my father added, "We want to rebuild our family, but we also need to be fair about everything. You wouldn't have that house if we hadn't helped you get on your feet." I frowned. "What are you trying to say?" He cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "We think it's only right that you give us a small share of your home's value, maybe 10%. You can call it repayment, or just acknowledgement of what we did for you." For a moment, I just stared at them. I honestly thought I had misheard. After everything they'd done, breaking into my home, trying to take my wife's things, forcing me to call the police, they were now asking for money. My mother reached for my hand and said softly, "It's not about control anymore. It's about fairness. We invested in you, and families share what they have." That was it. Something inside me broke, but not in sadness, in clarity. I finally saw them for who they were. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "You didn't invest in me," I said quietly. "You tried to own me. There's a difference." They both froze. My mother's face fell, and my father's jaw tightened, but I didn't wait for their reply. I dropped a few bills on the table for the coffee and walked out. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. My heart was pounding, but I felt lighter than I had in years. That short walk from the diner door to my car felt like closing a chapter one should have ended long ago. When I got home, I blocked their numbers again. There were no more letters after that, no more surprise visits or guilt-filled calls from relatives. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peaceful. That night, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, the same room that had once been filled with chaos and fear. Now it felt like mine, truly mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like a son who had to prove himself. I felt like a man who had finally taken his life back. And that was the last time I ever saw them. A year later, life finally felt different. The pain hadn't vanished completely, but it had softened into something I could live with. The house, once a place filled with tension and memories of betrayal, began to feel like home again. I decided it was time to give it a fresh start, a new beginning that reflected who I had become. I started with the walls. The dull beige paint that came with the house was replaced with warm, earthy tones, shades of blue and oak that made the space feel calm and alive. I replaced the old furniture with pieces I chose carefully, not because someone else approved, but because I liked them. Every small change felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been taken. The biggest project was the living room. That's where the worst of it had happened, the boxes, the shouting, the disbelief. I wanted that space to mean something else now. So I added a bookshelf by the window, filled it with Sophie's favorite novels, and framed one of our wedding photos to hang above the piano. That piano had almost been taken away that day. I remembered the movers trying to lift it, my father telling them to keep going, my heart pounding in my chest. Now it stood safely in its corner, shining after I had it restored. Sometimes when I played it, I felt her near, not in sadness, but in peace. Outside, I built a small garden. Sophie had always wanted one, full of lilies and lavender. Every morning, I stepped out with a cup of coffee and watched the sun rise over the flowers. It reminded me that healing doesn't happen all at once. It grows quietly like those plants, one day at a time. I also learned to enjoy silence again. No more anxious glances at the door, no more worrying about who might show up. The locks were changed, the security cameras stayed up, but I didn't need them as much anymore. What I needed most was trust in myself, and I finally had it. When friends visited, they often said, "Your house feels peaceful." I smiled every time because they didn't know how much that meant. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that I had survived something I once thought would break me. Every time I walked past the front door, I remembered that Sunday, the movers, the yelling, my mother's voice telling me I couldn't manage alone. But instead of pain, I felt strength. Because I had managed, I had rebuilt. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I would light a candle near the piano and sit in silence. I didn't talk to Sophie out loud, but I felt her presence, proud, steady, warm. And I knew that standing up for myself hadn't just protected my house. It had protected her memory too. That was the real healing. Not forgetting the past, but reshaping it, turning what once was a scene of loss into a symbol of peace, strength, and love that never really left. 2 years later, life had settled into something calm and steady. I had learned to live quietly, without waiting for the next problem or the next confrontation. My days were simple: work, a few close friends, evenings at home with music or a book. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt peaceful. One morning, I went out to check my mailbox and found a plain white envelope with my mother's handwriting on it. My heart paused for a second. It had been almost 2 years since I last heard from either of them. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away without reading it, but curiosity, or maybe a bit of closure, made me open it. The letter was short. My mother wrote that she and my father were moving into an assisted living community. She said they were getting older, and that life had taught them a few things they hadn't understood before. Her words were calm, almost soft, not filled with guilt or excuses this time. "We never understood what independence meant to you. Maybe now we do." I sat there quietly, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. I didn't feel anger anymore. There wasn't sadness either, just a strange kind of stillness. For years, I had carried so much pain and disappointment that I forgot what it was like to simply feel at peace. I folded the letter carefully and walked inside. The afternoon light poured into the living room, reflecting off the piano and the soft-colored wall. I went to the memory box that sat on the shelf, the one labeled Sophie's memory box. Inside were old photos, a few notes, and small mementos from a life that had shaped me. I placed the letter inside, right next to Sophie's favorite picture, the one of us laughing on the beach. It felt right to keep it there. That box held pieces of love, loss, and lessons learned, everything that had made me who I was. I didn't write back to my mother. There was nothing more to say. Sometimes closure doesn't come from words or long conversations. It comes from acceptance, from understanding that some people will never change the way you want them to, but that doesn't mean you have to carry their mistakes forever. That evening, I made myself dinner, turned on some soft music, and watched the sunset through the kitchen window. The sky turned orange and pink, the same colors Sophie loved. I smiled, feeling something I hadn't in a long time, peace, simple and full. Before going to bed, I walked to the front door and turned the key in the lock. It clicked softly, but this time, it wasn't out of fear that someone might break in. It was out of comfort, knowing that the space behind that door truly belonged to me. I had lost so much and fought through even more, but in the end I had found what mattered most: freedom, peace, and a home filled not with control or guilt, but with quiet, honest love.